For some time now, and even today and beyond, I have been living in a sober house. When you see me come to work, glammed up, right after the show, I go across the street, I do my Pilates. I told you 2 hours a day, I like to take care of my body. And you know I've had a struggle with in my past, and I never went to a place to get the treatment. I don't know how, except God was sitting on my shoulder and I just stopped.
3 million files dropped. And suddenly the internet is convinced that Hollywood's darkest secrets are finally clawing their way into the light. Powerful names, whispered cover-ups, unanswered questions. But while conspiracy threads spiral out of control, there's one very real, very heartbreaking mystery that refuses to go away. What is truly happening to Wendy Williams? The once unstoppable queen of daytime television, who built an empire exposing other people's secrets, is now at the center of a battle over her own life, her health, her money, and even her voice. And the deeper you dig, the more complicated it gets. Just months ago, fans thought they saw signs of hope. A public sighting, a phone interview, a flicker of that old sharp commentary when she spoke about Diddy. But behind the scenes, court filings were painting a far darker picture, one involving cognitive impairment, legal guardianship, and a fight over whether she was even capable of consenting to a documentary about her own decline. Now the question isn't just, is Wendy getting better? It's who controls the narrative and why. Just months ago, fans were clinging to hope. In August 2024, she was spotted out shopping at a holistic wellness store in New Jersey. Witnesses said she looked okay. Not perfect, but present. Then came the early October phone interview. Her voice sounded familiar. Sharp. Engaged. When she spoke about Diddy and the disturbing footage circulating at the time, she sounded like the Wendy people remembered, direct, unapologetic, almost vindicated. She even hinted that people had told her, "Wendy, you called it." For a moment, it felt like the comeback arc was writing itself. Maybe the hiatus had helped. Maybe the silence had been healing. Maybe the rumors were exaggerated. And then the whiplash. Because while fans were replaying that interview and dissecting her tone for signs of strength, court filings were telling a very different story. In legal documents submitted by her court-appointed guardian, Wendy was described as cognitively impaired, permanently disabled, and legally incapacitated. Permanently incapacitated. That's not gossip. That's language pulled straight from the courtroom. Suddenly, the hopeful sightings and spirited phone calls collided with something much heavier. A formal declaration that the once razor-sharp host could no longer manage her own affairs. Hope turned into confusion. Confusion turned into fear. How could both versions exist at the same time? Then came the documentary that poured gasoline on the fire. Where's Wendy Williams? Marketed as a raw look at her life after being placed under guardianship, it showed moments that were difficult to watch. Wendy downing an entire bottle of vodka, slurring her words, appearing disoriented in the back seat of a car, admitting parts of New York didn't look familiar anymore. Viewers weren't just watching a celebrity struggle. They were watching vulnerability in real time. But almost immediately, a legal battle erupted behind the scenes. Her guardian, Sabrina Morrissey, sued to block the documentary's release, alleging Wendy was incapable of consenting to filming and that she was exploited while in a compromised state. The claim suggested there was no valid contract and that deeply personal health details were exposed without proper authorization. Lifetime fired back. Their legal team argued the documentary was a raw and unfiltered portrayal of a public figure navigating guardianship. They accused the guardian of interfering with free speech and even implied that isolating Wendy from her family may have worsened her decline. They suggested the film allowed Wendy one of her last opportunities to connect honestly with her fans, the very audience she built her career on. And just like that, the story stopped being only about health. It became about control. Who gets to decide what the public sees? Who speaks for Wendy? And who benefits from silence? To understand how things escalated this far, you have to rewind to 2022 when Wendy was placed under guardianship after Wells Fargo raised concerns about potential financial exploitation and undue influence. The bank froze her accounts, triggering a legal chain reaction. Wendy publicly questioned why her money was being withheld, insisting she deserved answers. "I want my money," she said bluntly at the time. It was vintage Wendy, confrontational, unfiltered, demanding transparency. But from there, the guardianship tightened. Decisions about her finances, her movements, even media appearances shifted out of her hands. Family members later claimed they didn't know where she was being treated and could only speak to her if she called them. Online, distrust began brewing. Not necessarily conspiracy, but suspicion. When access is restricted and information is filtered, speculation fills the vacuum. Medically, the timeline adds another layer of complexity. In 2019, Wendy openly admitted on her talk show that she was living in a sober house, confronting her struggles with addiction after years of privately battling it. It was a vulnerable confession that stunned audiences. In 2022, she relapsed and entered rehab again for severe alcoholism. Then in 2023, after extensive neurological testing, her team announced she had been diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia and frontotemporal dementia, FTD, a degenerative condition that affects language, behavior, and executive function. The diagnosis seemed to explain the memory lapses, the word-finding difficulties, the erratic public moments. But later, her attorney suggested something different. Perhaps it wasn't classic FTD at all, but alcohol-induced dementia, a condition that can sometimes improve with sustained sobriety. That distinction matters. One diagnosis implies irreversible progression. The other suggests at least the possibility of stabilization. Two narratives, two futures, and no clear consensus. Meanwhile, public incidents continued to complicate the picture. There was the night she was reportedly seen moving from restaurant to bar in New York, appearing lonely at first, but lighting up when she recognized familiar faces. There was the canceled appearance at the Atlanta Women's Expo after concerns she seemed disoriented in a promo video. In the documentary, a loved one is shown discovering a bottle of vodka among her belongings and asking if she drank it all in one day. In another moment, she admits parts of her own city don't look familiar. These weren't tabloid exaggerations. There were scenes captured on camera. They humanized her, but they also alarmed viewers. This wasn't just headline drama. It was visible decline. And that's what makes this story so gripping and so unsettling. Because this isn't about vague industry rumors or anonymous sources. It's about a woman who once controlled the cultural conversation, now caught in a storm of legal battles, conflicting diagnoses, family tension, and public scrutiny. In an era obsessed with uncovering hidden truths, Wendy Williams' situation stands out not because it's wrapped in mystery, but because every new revelation seems to create even more questions. And just when it seemed like the narrative had settled, devastating but settled, everything shifted again. Because the diagnosis that framed this entire chapter of Wendy's life wasn't as airtight as people thought. In 2023, her team publicly confirmed that Wendy Williams had been diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia and frontotemporal dementia, FTD, a degenerative brain disorder known to affect language, personality, and executive function. Explain the word loss, the confusion, the behavioral changes. FTD is progressive. It doesn't reverse. When a statement was released, it felt definitive. Tragic, but definitive. Fans mourned the version of Wendy they felt was slipping away in real time. But then came a new twist. Her attorney stepped forward with a different angle, not outright denying she was struggling, but questioning whether frontotemporal dementia was the correct label at all. He suggested something else may have been at play: alcohol-induced dementia, a condition tied not to irreversible neurodegeneration, but to prolonged substance abuse. And here's why that distinction matters. Alcohol-induced cognitive impairment can, in some cases, stabilize or even partially improve with sobriety. FTD does not. One diagnosis closes the door. The other leaves it cracked open. So which is it? Was the original FTD diagnosis the sober medical truth delivered after extensive neurological testing? Or is the newer alcohol-induced explanation a more accurate reflection of what happens when long-term addiction takes a toll on the brain? And perhaps the more uncomfortable question, is this a genuine medical disagreement or a strategic legal repositioning? Because let's be honest about timing. The pushback against the FDD diagnosis surfaced while discussions about ending her guardianship were also surfacing. If Wendy's condition were framed as alcohol-induced rather than degenerative dementia, it subtly reshapes the legal landscape. Alcohol-related cognitive impairment implies treatment, recovery potential, rehabilitation. FDD implies permanence. And remember, in court filings, she has already been described as permanently incapacitated. That phrase carries enormous weight. It justifies control. It reinforces restrictions. It extends oversight. So when her attorney introduces an alternative explanation, it doesn't just challenge a medical label. It challenges the foundation of the guardianship itself. Is it possible that early assessments were made during a period of extreme alcohol use, skewing cognitive testing results? Absolutely. Is it equally possible that the FDD diagnosis was carefully evaluated and medically sound? Also yes. Neurological disorders are notoriously complex. Symptoms overlap. Addiction can mask or mimic degenerative disease. Even specialists sometimes disagree. And that gray area, that sliver of uncertainty, is where the intrigue lives. Because if this is FDD, then what we're witnessing is a heartbreaking, irreversible decline of one of television's most electric personalities. But if it's alcohol-induced cognitive damage, then the narrative shifts from inevitability to intervention, from final chapter to fragile second chance. And notice how both interpretations support completely different storylines. One frames Wendy as a patient in need of protection from herself and the world. The other frames her as someone who may have been written off too soon. Neither version is simple. Neither version is clean. But the existence of two competing medical narratives, introduced publicly, strategically, and at pivotal legal moments, keeps the story from settling into a single conclusion. And maybe that's why this refuses to fade from public attention. Because the woman who made a career leaning across her purple chair and asking, "What's really going on?" is now the one at the center of that very question. For decades, she dissected scandals, exposed inconsistencies, and challenged official narratives. Now her own life is layered with conflicting accounts, sealed documents, legal battles, medical terminology, and unanswered tensions. Is this a tragic medical spiral playing out under the harsh glare of fame? Is it a guardianship system that overcorrected or mismanaged at a critical moment? Or is it something far more complicated, a story still unfolding behind doors the public can't see? The facts are on record. The diagnoses are documented. The legal filings are real. And yet the full picture still feels just out of reach. And that's what makes this so hard to look away from.